Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for almost stealing Yannick's slot, but I can confirm that I'm actually booked to go to Brittany for the summer, so I hope he'll forgive me for that. As Roger said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about big data, and you don't need me to tell you that this was something that was high on your agenda last year. It certainly stayed top of the corporate agenda in 2013. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you what it's about. I suppose there are three strands to it. You can think of it in terms of internal data, the kind of stuff that comes from marketing and media campaigns, customer calls, transactional data. Obviously, there's the external piece, aggregated, usually anonymous, coming through media platforms and so on. And then there's increasingly what we describe as unstructured data, conversations, usually a social media trail, where we're giving a lot of clues about what we like and what our friends like, and this is rich territory indeed. In fact, it's very much described as the competitive weapon of the decade, the holy grail, if you like. And of course, with any holy grail, there's a little bit of myth that surrounds that. So, I suppose at the risk of insulting some of you in the audience, I'm going to suggest that although the theme of the conference is about content to commerce, that all too often we start with that commerce in mind. We look at the sales targets and then we think about our engagement strategy. And in the same way that the conference is sort of turning that on its head a little bit, I want to turn the idea of big data around for you, if I can, and put it to you through the eyes of the consumer. At the Future Foundation, we call this opportunity consumer capital. And this is really the idea that the consumer is increasingly aware that his or her data is worth an awful lot to all of you and everyone around. And that they're perfectly prepared to share this data, but very much, or at least increasingly, on their terms. If we think about that data, just because you can use it doesn't necessarily mean you should. I was struck when I saw a quote from Nielsen at the ARF conference, the research forum in New York last month, where they basically said, everything you buy, we now see. And because they can see it, they're going to sell it to every retail advertiser on the planet, albeit in an aggregated, anonymized way. And it's an extension of what's already very much part and parcel of our working lives. But if you think about it from the consumer angle, it's not exactly a comforting thought put in those terms. And this, if you like, piece is something that Zappos started working with back in 2011. And they discovered that, just because we can make it more relevant and more personalized, it's not always about what the consumer wants. They noticed when they were doing some advertising around underwear, and even though lots of people were looking at lingerie that they were putting out to them, that we didn't necessarily want a G-string prompt every time we logged onto our computers, because let's face it, we're not always the only ones using our machines. And this anxiety, if you like, that comes from looking at too much underwear, or just thinking about our data, if you like, is something that Sherry Turkle, an MIT professor, has talked a bit about. And she says that from the consumer perspective, I guess what you sense is that you don't know when you're being watched, and so therefore you assume that you always are. And that creates a sense of loss of control and certainly of identity. So privacy, if you like, is this very big but slightly impossible issue that we're all going to have to deal with, perhaps more and more. And I don't want to dwell on the regulatory side of this here. I'm sure you know that it's moving gradually to the consumer's favor. And that a lot of the content platforms out there are again supporting this. Internet Explorer, latest version launched last year, going with opt-in as the default option. But I thought I'd illustrate the problem with privacy, or the sort of ongoing legacy that we'll always have to deal with, through a little personal anecdote, if you'll allow me. So I think you've probably clocked at this point that I'm Irish, and therefore I come from a very large family. And the Kelly family loves Facebook. We have our own page. There are 3 generations of Kellys on there, and about 35 cousins. One of my cousins is pretty much a confirmed bachelor. And one day, he posts, he sends flowers to his as yet unpublic girlfriend on Valentine's Day. She's a little less shy than he is, and she posts this to his page to say thank you. The Kelly page ignites with excitement. His long-suffering mother starts rejoicing on the spot, and his cover is blown. And this, if you like, is something of a problem for all of us. A recent study by JWT picked out that about 67% of us worry a lot about all the secrets our friends will tell everybody else on Facebook. Essentially, we fear that we're tripping ourselves up socially a lot of the time. We worry about our dodgy online past, and this isn't going to go away. So let me break this down in slightly more practical terms for you and talk a bit about what you, from a brand or from an agency steering a brand into those capital waters, if you like, are going to have to think about. First of all, it's true, there's a lot of data coming from a lot of places, and this is very special indeed. Whether it's consumers basically asking us to remember what we've looked at so they don't have to, whether it's things like the quantified self, where we're constantly engaging with apps to improve our own self-performance and awareness of what's going around, and we're willingly handing over our information in exchange for advice, or whether it's the sort of end of inefficiency, we call it, the active seeking out of algorithms that will tell us when exactly to buy the thing that we're looking for. It seems on the surface that we're very willing to feed the Facebook server farms like I've got on screen for you here at will. But of course, the consumer is a fickle beast. And actually what we're really saying to you guys out there is that we would prefer to loan you our data and keep a hold of it for when we choose that you can contact and engage with us. And increasingly, we're appreciative of efforts by media platforms out there, like the New York Times, acknowledging this and that opt-in world. So a natural strategy here is then to move into the area of surprise and delight, where I guess you're thinking about pleasing customers who do opt in, who do want more relevance from you. But again, this is tricky territory. Gap ran a Groupon campaign. I'm sure some of you have seen it, but basically, they essentially offered the consumer $50 worth of merchandise for the price of $25. 400,000 people thought this was a brilliant idea, which meant that they shifted $22 million worth of merchandise, but for just $11 million worth of revenue. Somewhere along the line, this was a loss-making venture for these guys. And we all know we need to get past the Groupon model of gifts, and Barclays in the UK are just about to launch their bespoke offers program, where essentially they're going to give their merchants the control of consumer data that they've aggregated to allow them to work with options and to make it more personalized and more relevant, especially where there are fans, as the guys earlier talked about. But still, somewhere along the lines, this is something interrupting the consumer's world. It's another deal that you didn't know that you needed. And at what point does that irritate as much as it might endear? So I guess I'm looking at a future where consumer capital, if you like, is in danger of tipping over the edge. It won't necessarily do that, but I think if we only think about it in data terms, there is a real danger that we'll make mistakes, and that really the cost of surprise and delight and attracting consumers just becomes too high to sustain. Let's think about it from the consumer perspective. I know from an agency view, you'll be thinking, well, all we need to do really is get the consumer to engage. And once they're a fan, then we can talk to them in more personalized terms, and then the engagement becomes more obvious, and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case all the time, or will always be the case, as more and more brands get better at attracting and intriguing the consumer. And what they're really looking for is, I think a lot of the time, a deeper engagement, and we really need to understand where that comes from. So I'm going to share with you our view on that. I suppose if we look at the small sample area of just what we do online in the social networking sense, we're getting a view that around a third of us now who are engaging with social networks are following brands, which is, a nice positive step forward. And mostly, we're working with a fairly personal, manageable group, usually about 5, sometimes up to about 10. So that's quite easy to engage. And of course, some of the time, what we are looking for are quite functional, literal, monetary advantages and benefits. And here we're prepared to trade more. This is where consumer capital is becoming a more conscious effort in the consumer mind. And we are prepared to hand over information if we're going to get some money off a deal. We do love a deal. But what we also find is while there's a staggering number of people engaging at some level, not 81% necessarily just looking for discounts, but across the piece, either looking for discounts, competitions, alerts, whatever it may be, most people are doing that. We find that people more inclined to do that were also more inclined to have many more brands in their portfolio. And so there's a little bit of an issue when you can personalize your offer to these people as much as you like, but there might be 30 other brands doing exactly the same thing, and where do they notice you? And I suppose I want to put it to you that that volume approach is a bit of a tightrope to walk, and I've got some examples here where I guess I'm wondering, while I think they're very engaging now, I'm wondering how long they're going to last. So you've got Meabh Bank in the States, who, as well as giving out for millennials a credit score, they're also awarding them with a social score, which basically means the louder you shout on Facebook or another platform, the more rewards you're going to get. And I'm not so sure about that. Or you've got Alan Sully in Bangalore running a really nice outdoor campaign where essentially they put up 52 shirts from their latest spring collection and they invited their fans to tweet. The more tweets, the closer the shirts got to the front of the billboard, and eventually they dropped off onto unsuspecting but probably pleased consumers in the street. Now, it's a great idea, but you can imagine that this is creating an awful lot of online noise for very small or very few people physically benefiting. The good news is, of course, that a lot of us connect to a small number of brands in a rather more thoughtful and appreciative way. We're connecting because we either love their content or we feel that they enhance our own personal identity as well. And this is up to 2 out of 3 people doing that. I guess you see some fantastic engagement campaigns, but you also see things like, in my view, a mistake from Andrex, where they're really asking people to engage with them around how it is that they handle their toilet paper. I picked this up from a Facebook condescending corporate brand page, I think is how they file it, under, forgive me, these are the internet's words, not mine, the absolute arse end of Facebook engagement tactics. So I wouldn't recommend that you go down that particular route. I think creativity is a much safer place to play, and I know you all know about how much that means to the consumer. 1 in 5 global consumers have already tried out some level of co-creation. 4 in 5 global consumers say that they're prepared to do this if indeed they're incentivized to do so properly. So no surprise to see a brand like Canon running for the 2nd year their Imagination project, where they're inviting people to submit photos and films along themes that they can personally identify with. And the best ones go to a festival, and they're made to feel very special indeed. I think another perfectly good reason, forgive me, I've messed that one up. I was going to say a perfectly good reason to connect with a brand on Facebook or any other social platform is, of course, just for fun. And this next campaign I'm going to show you is literally just that, but I feel it's very engaging indeed. Isn't that lovely? There you see the Consumer Live in Antwerp station. About a third of us say that they'll follow brands, will follow brands on Facebook just for fun, but I'm pretty sure that if you told them that singing in the street was part of it, we'd soon retract. Still, a pretty engaging campaign. I think where the real money comes from, we all know, is when consumers have skin in the game and when they are worried about their reputation or social capital, as we like to call it. Of course, we like it when our posts are liked. We're really aware that recognition is absolutely key in our main stage, if you like. Couch Cache, have any of you seen this app? This app is purely designed to speak to just that. And it essentially allows you to check in Foursquare style to wherever you wish, but from the comfort of your own sofa, probably sat there in your pajamas, waxing lyrical about the latest organic microbrew beer that you've just tried, or the latest trendy indie lyrics that you've just listened to. But really, you're not actually any cooler, you just seem that way. You got to wonder about how much we need to stand out for the crowd to get engaged with that kind of thing. It's a bit of fun, I suppose. Increasingly, what we see is that people do, though, want to demarcate themselves in some particular way. We see the numbers that want to stand out from the crowd very much on the rise. And in fact, if you include people who slightly agree with those statements, the numbers rise to a very, very significant majority. But we did some factor analysis, and what we also found was that if you're into that, you're also extremely into the idea that you need to be the best you possibly can at whatever you're engaging with, and that you really invest in your hobbies. And so actually the thing that really stands out is your skills and being recognized for something that's absolutely genuine to you. So let me share one other example with you. Camelback is, I think many of you will know Camelback, an outdoor company, largely performs like a sports manufacturer. And their main audience is either ex-military or people who are particularly interested in extreme sports. And they set up their Facebook page and weren't getting anywhere terribly far until they started some proper social listening. And they discovered that what people cared about wasn't in any way the brand story or the actual equipment that they were using themselves. What, in fact, they wanted to talk about, or wanted the excuse to talk about, was the fact that they thought that Camelback, or they used Camelback in what they saw as life-threatening situations. And they wanted the brand to act as a prompt or a prop for them to be able to share these exciting stories. As soon as that became the emphasis of the page, then likes went through the roof. In fact, about 100,000 were gathered in a matter of months. And in the last 6 months, about another 100,000 again. And of course, the consumer posts far, far outflank anything the brand is putting up there. So just to wind down and bring this to a close for you, I guess from a media perspective, I'm going to say something really basic, but nonetheless obvious, and I think will still be an issue for many of you when you're putting campaigns out there, as data and data links become more part of the piece, just as we automatically go through. When I logged on to look at the Camelback page just last week to see where their likes were up to, I couldn't help but notice that their latest campaign was about ditching the need for bottled water. And I also couldn't help noticing that the sponsored ad link running down the right-hand side of that was for Evian. So that's unfortunate. And I think these things just do still happen, and we've got to watch out for them. As I hope the Camelback example showed, I think you really need to pay attention to who's getting the share of voice. I think The Guardian have been doing a fantastic job at elevating the consumer or the citizen perspective in terms of their journalistic approach that they've invited them to do for a long time now. And seeing their Witness platform come to life very recently is that coming to fruition, I guess. Be very interesting to see how much real engagement that generates. But I put the Joel Stein quote up here because I think that sentiment is now becoming mature, if you like, in the consumer mind, where the value proposition is really much more something that we engage with. We're a lot less complacent about these things these days. And for that, I would say to you, in many places, look to put a campaign out on the forums that are a little less traveled, that are a little more private. We've seen a number of studies where the serious eyeballs, where the deeper conversations, where the more meaningful exchanges happen away from the main stage. And it's not that main media platforms aren't fabulous, of course they are, But when they can develop adjacent forums and slightly more private conversations, that's where the real money comes in. So just one last slide with some final things to, I hope you'll carry around in the back of your minds as you're thinking about the rest of the content in the conference. Data is absolutely fabulous, but the odds are a little stacked against you and a little more in the consumer's favor. It can't just be about that. Of course, surprise and delight is a very obvious route to take and one that I would absolutely encourage. But I think increasingly, as more and more brands get savvy about big data, this will feel a little bit like a race to the top or maybe the bottom. We've actively encouraged some of our even concierge brands, clients, like Virtue, to step away from, I guess, forums where they're inviting too much conversation and too much noise, because it just feels a little bit intrusive, and it's a fine line I appreciate. In terms of communications, I think I've made this clear. I think the consumer wants it to be about them. They need that recognition. And if that's the case, then you need to give them some space to elevate their own voice. It won't work if you're asking everybody to tweet to the same tune. And finally, can I say, or emphasize if you like, that I really do believe that capital comes not just from fantastic data and increased technology and ever better analytics, but increasingly it's about a deeper, a more meaningful exchange, a conversation that, yeah, sure, means a bit less scale to get started and a bit more time to develop. But in my view, it'll get you the kind of capital that's built to last. Thank you.